Okay, so we learned last time the Mishnah, Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, says that if a widow says that she doesn't want to move out of her husband's house, the Yorshim, so the Yorshim are possible. It's possible that they're her children, or they're possible they're not her children, because if if her husband had been married before and had kids, and then he married her later, the Yorshim are not her son, their children. They're her husband's children, but they're the Yorshim. So they're not allowed to throw her out of the house and say, "We'll send you food in your father's house." They're not allowed to say that. They have to uh, let her continue living there in the same comforts she had before, with the same perks she had before. And if she says, and if she moved out, if she moved back to her parents' house. So what if she says, I don't want to go to you for you to give me the food. I want you to deliver the food to me. So she's not allowed to say that. Um, so the Yorshim are able to say, we don't have to deliver. If you would have stayed here, we would have given you your food. But if you're not willing to come here, we're not going to give you food. But if the reason is because she's relatively young and she's roughly their same age, then it's inappropriate for her to go to their house for the food. So then they would have to send it as delivery. So Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph the Gemara. So Turn Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso, Mishtameshes b'mother k'derech shemishtameshes b'chay ba'ala, b'avadim uvishvachos k'derech shemishtameshes b'chay ba'ala, ushvachos. She has to live in the dwelling place the same way that she was the perks that she was served in her while her husband was alive, the same amount of servants and maidservants. But k'derech shemishtameshes b'chay ba'ala, in the way that she was served while her husband was alive. Next thing the Brisa says, "Bikarim uviksasos k'derech shemishtameshes b'chay ba'ala." The same types of pillows and blankets or clothes, because Kesuvos means coverings. It might also include clothes, but but when you talk karam uksasos, it usually means the bedding. So it doesn't mean clothes, but it mean pillows and blankets the way that she used when her husband was alive. With the same silver and golden utensils she used when she was alive, when her husband was alive. Shekach Kasavla, because this is what he wrote in her ksuva. Va'ati he Yaseves bevesi umizinsa minichsai koyimei magar al mosayach bevesi. And you will be living in my house and be fed from my property all the days that you live as a widow in my house. So the same way that she was living in his house, she has the same standard of living after he dies because the ksuva um, provides that for her. Tani Rav Yosef taught bevesi v'lo bevaksi, in my house, but not in my hut. If he had, Rashi explains it's like a cone-shaped hut. You had a mat and you leaned it against the wall, and that was a house. That's not much of a house. Um, so in that such a case, then if it's so small, then so then there's not enough room for everyone. So in that case, Rashi says his intent wasn't to displace his own children and to keep her here. So only if he had a house where there's enough room for his Yorshim and for her, she able to stay. But if he lived in a tiny place, then he would not displace his children so that she would have a place to live. Rav Nachman says, Yisomim shemachu moder almana lo asav lo klum. If the Yisomim, so the husband who died, so his sons, if they sold the house that the almana was living at, lo asav lo kum, it has no halachic significance. If they sold it, it remains unsold because they didn't have a right to sell it, because they were obligated as the Yorshim to provide it for her to live in. Umayishna be Rabbi Asi Am Rabbi Yochanan. Why is this halacha different than what Rabbi Yossi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? The Am Rabbi Osam Am Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Yisomim shakadu machru b'nechsei muatim. If Yisomim, they got hurry. Shakadmu is like they acted quick and they quick and sold minchasim muatim. So small. movable properties that Rashi says that the girls, the girls, the daughters deserve that because that's where the daughter's food would come from. And we said before that the boys would have to beg for food, but the daughters would get money from these movable properties. So if the Yorshim sold these movable properties, even though it was supposed to be for their sisters to get fed from, Masha machru machru, that which they sold, it did get sold. So what's the difference between selling these movable properties that the daughters are supposed to get fed from, that the sale took effect, even though they shouldn't have sold it? And why is it different than if they sold the house that the widow was supposed to live in, that the sale is null and void? What's the difference? The ksuva is requiring both of those, uh, uh, the house for the widow and these movable properties to sell on behalf of food for the daughters. So the Gemara says, "Hasam lamishtabdu. There, when they sold the movable properties that the girls are supposed to get fed from, they were not indebted while he was still alive. But the house that she was going to live in, it was indebted to her while he was still alive. Meaning there was no obligation. He was already obligated to give her a roof over her head while they were still married. So that obligation was a prior obligation. The obligation that his daughters would get fed from his movables property, that obligation started upon his death. So therefore, if those things got sold, the sale took effect. Amar Abaye, Abaye said, Naktinon, we had learned, what is it translated there? Mother Amana Shanafal, Ein Hayorshim Chayabim Livnoso. If the house of the widow collapsed, the Yorshim are not obligated to rebuild it. And more than that, even if she says you don't have to build it, I'll rebuild it, they don't listen to her. So it's the estate's property, and once it collapses, it seems Allah is saying is that the estate no longer has to give her a roof over her head anymore. They would still have to give her food, but because the house that she had while she was alive it collapsed and it doesn't exist anymore, she doesn't live there anymore. Even if she will tell them that she'll pay for it to be rebuilt, she doesn't have that right. Boy, Abai had a question. Sheyifta mai. What if she knew that it was rickety and she wanted to reinforce it and make it stronger? And she would pay for it herself. So it didn't collapse yet, but why does she want to do this? Because she thinks it's going to collapse. So does she have the right to, or if she did fix it and it collapsed, then what's halacha? So teku. We don't know if she gets to stay there or not. So if she reinforced the house so it wouldn't collapse, do we say that when it would have collapsed by a certain date, so she doesn't have a right to live there anymore, or because it didn't collapse yet, she gets to stay there? Teku. We don't know. We don't. The Gemara doesn't have an answer to that. It seems to be a machlokas between Rashi and Tosos what this Gemara is saying. According to Rashi, it's shifts in a past tense. If she did reinforce it so it wouldn't collapse, what's halacha? According to Tosos says shem davarhu or sheyifatza. Uh, what is the halacha if she wants to fix it and reinforce it? Do we let her or not? Then the Gemara says teku. So Danny, I don't know if you, but some say that teku stands for Tishbi Yataret Kushiotu Bayot. That Eliyahu Hanavi will explain this when he will come. Yeah, but that's a different machlokas. It's not related to us. But when Mashiach comes, how is smicha going to come back? According to the Rambam, there's something called chidush hasmicha. If all the chachamim in Eretz Yisrael would agree that they're going to give smicha, then smicha can be restarted, even though the chain got broken. But if all the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael wanted to, it would restart. And there was a whole dispute about this in the 1500s with Mari Beirav, who was a Rebbe of the Beit Yosef. I think he wanted to restart it, and other people were very upset at him. But according to other Rishonim, Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come, and Eliyahu Hanavi had smicha from a chain from Moshe, so he's going to give people smicha. So, okay, Amra Efshi. So if she says, I can't leave, or I can't leave my father's house, so she moved out of the husband's house, but she says, I can't move to come collect the food, the sons can say, okay, we're not going to feed you. If you would live here, we would feed you, but we don't have to have a delivery service, and the Mishnah agrees they don't have an obligation to send the food to her. So the Gemara asks, "V'leis v'la kiyas v'hasam." Why don't they give her food there as if she was living in the house, still in the estate's house? So the Gemara says, Rav Huna. This should prove something that Rav Huna said. The Rav Huna berchas habayim meruba, because Rav Huna says that the bracha of the house is how many people are living there. So if she would be living in the house still, there'd be more people in the house, so there would be more bracha. But because she left, there's less bracha in the house. So v'leis v'lo lefi berchas habayis. So why don't they still give her some food based on the amount of bracha that is remaining in the house, of the about who's left in the house? So the Gemara says, Hachinami. You're right. So if she'd be in the house, she'd be entitled to more than she gets when she left the house. But part of the berchas habayis is having more people in the house. Rav Huna. So now we have a related teaching from Rav Huna. Lashon chachamim bracha. So from the way that the Chachamim worded things, we learned something that it's a bracha. Lashon Chachamim Osher, from the way the Chachamim worded things, we see something about wealth. Lashon Chachamim Marpe. From the way that the Chachamim said, we find ways of getting better. Bracha Hadamran. About bracha, we just said that Rav Huna says that the more people in the house, there's more bracha in the house. They didn't explicitly say that, but it's inferred in that teaching. Osher did not. So how do the way that the Chachamim teach something, word something, teaches us about being rich? Did not, because we learned in a Mishnah. So when you buy something, so these are fruits or produce. So the way you would acquire that is you would have to pick them up. So Mashach Lomarad, if he did the picking them up or pulling them, which is the form of kinyan, but he didn't measure it. Kana, he acquired it. So midiraisa, what paying for a movable thing is not a kinyan. You don't acquire movable things by paying money. Field can be with kinyan or with chazaka, but movable things, depending on what they are, you might have to. If it's an animal, you might have to lead it, or ride it. And other things you have to pick them up or drag them or something like that. Marav lo mashach, if he measured the food, the fruits, but he didn't do the mashicha lo kana, he didn't acquire it yet. So the thing is that let's say maybe the seller gets a better deal, so it's not necessarily proper to resell it. Maybe he does. But what's a quick way that a guy that the buyer can make a kinyan on all this produce? If the buyer was a sharp person, he should just rent the place. And so there's something called kinyan agav. If you have real estate, you're able to acquire, when you make a kinyan on the real estate, you can acquire other things, movable properties with it, even though you couldn't acquire the movable properties themselves with it. But once you're also acquiring land, you could also acquire movable things. So there's a whole there's a questions in Kedushin and Bava Kama, I think it's in Bava Kama, about certain aspects of it. And Rav Aaron explained that there's two different types of kinyan agav. One is kinyan agav when the items, the movable things, are not on the property. So let's say I rented you this space right here, but but the stuff that I'm selling you are on my lawn. So the piece of land that I'm renting you isn't on there. So that's not exactly the same kinyan agav of this. I'm renting you the piece of property where the actual things are on that literal place. This Gemara is talking about where he said there's a lot of produce, he can't pick them all up. So he says, let me rent this space. And a renting, you could acquire the renting by giving the money. So he had intent that when he was giving the money for the kinyan to acquire this small amount of land that he's renting, he's acquiring the produce which is on that piece of land. So that's a sharp way that, I mean, a quick way, if he's a clever, sharp guy, so he can rent the land and therefore he makes a kinyan on all the fruit right away. So we see that being able to acquire it quickly by making a kinyan is a simon where you could learning about wealth, acquiring wealth, and the Chachamim taught us that trick is a way about getting. It's a good financial advice. Yeah, the article in the note says that it's so that the seller doesn't back out of the deal, since even though he got paid, but midiraisa, the kinyan didn't take effect yet. So if the buyer asked, can I just rent this land underneath it? And so he's kona all of it. So then the seller can't go back on the deal and try to sell it to someone else for more. Marpe, how does the way that Chachamim word something teach us about good health? Lo yilas adam chitin v'yaneach gabi makasu b'Pesach. A person is not allowed to chew wheat and put it on his wound on Pesach b'mnei shemach mitzos, because when you put the saliva with the wheat, it becomes chametz, and we're not allowed to have hana from chametz on Pesach. So, but in the meantime of the chachamim telling us that this would become chametz, it's also telling us that this is a good medical, at least in that time, was a good medical treatment. I mean, lahavdil, until 150 years ago, whatever, they would put a plaster on it. How did they make a plaster? You would, in those days, they chewed on the on flour, and it would to get it soft, and it would put it over, and it would get hard, and it would protect the wound. So the Chachamim gave him medical advice. By the way, derech agav, Tana Rabbanan. We learned in the Bryce, Bishas Petros. Okay, so this is the start of a bunch of fascinating Gemaras. Some of them are probably literal and some of them aren't. We're not going to finish them tonight, but it's really, really interesting stuff. B'shas p'tiraso shel Rabbi. When Rabbi Huda Nasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, was about to die, Amar, he said, Levanai anitzarech, I need my sons. Nichnasu banav. So his sons came in. Amar lahem, he said to them, Hizar b'chvod imchem, be careful with the honor of your mother. Nir yehe dalek mimkamo, let the candle or the lamp should burn in its regular place. Shulchan herach mimkamo. The table should be set in its regular place. Mita tehe mutzaz mimkama. The bed or the couch should be in its regular place. So Rashi says the Gemara is going to tell us that even after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi died, in some form he returned every Friday night when Shabbos was starting. So he was saying the same way the table was set, but I guess with a place for him, they should keep setting it because he's going to come. And the light the same way. The mito is probably because those days, like what we talk about on Pesach, we were mesubim. So the mito was for him to be mesubim at the Suda. So have it all ready even on Shabbos. Yosef Chafni Shimon Efrasi. Yosef Chayfani. Rashi says Yosef was from Haifa and Shimon from Ephras. They served me when I was alive, and they will serve me after I die. So Hizar b'chvod imchem. So the first thing he said was, be careful with the respect of your mother. Diraisa he. So the Gemara says, why did he have to tell him? That the halacha is diraisa. The pasuk says, kabedas avicha v'yasimecha. So they already had an obligation to honor their mother. So just because Rebbi was dying, there's no difference. Why would he have to tell them? So the Gemara says, Eishes Av Havoi. She wasn't their mother. It was a second wife or a different wife. Their mother wasn't alive anymore. So still he was telling them they had to be careful with her honor. Eishes Av Nami Diraisahi. But honoring the wife of your father is also from a Torah level. The Tani, because we learned in the Brayisa, Kabed Es Avicha Ve'es Imacha. honor your father and mother with the word as avicha, zu eshes avicha. As includes the wife of your father. Ve'as imcha, and the as for your mother, zu bal imcha, is if you're the husband of your mother, you have an obligation to honor them. Vav Yasera. So kabed es avicha ve. What's that extra vav? L'rabos es achicha gado. So you have an obligation to honor your older brother also. So even if she wasn't their mother, but because she was their father's wife, they have an obligation to honor her. So the Gemara says, "Hani mili mechayim." This brisa is only while their father or their mother is alive. Of Allah misa lo, but after death it doesn't apply. So to honor your father's wife would only be while he's alive. The special diraisa of honoring your mother's husband is only while your mother's alive. And it seems that the obligation to honor your older brother would only be, I guess, when your father's alive. It seems to be an extension of that. Okay, the next thing he said, Ner Yehi Dalek Bimkamo. The lamp should be lit in its regular place. Shulchan Yehi Arch Bimkamo. The table should be set in its regular place. Mitu Temitzos Bimkamo. The bed or the couch should be arranged in its usual place. My taima. What's this reason? Kol Beishimshi. Every Friday, Ben Hashmashos, Rashi says the Beishimshi meant uh, Bein Hashmashos, so of the twilight period between the sunset and when the stars would come out, have a asalavese. He would come to his house even after he died. So he wanted everything to be arranged. Hahu Beishimsha, there was a certain Friday twilight time. Asa Shibavta Karya Abava. A neighbor came and called out by the door, Amra Amse. So Rebbi's maidservant, who we saw about her quite a while ago, but the Chachamim learned many halachas from this maidservant from Rebbi's house. Shtiku de Rebbi Yosef. She said, "Be quiet, because Rebbi is coming." Kaven deshama shuvlo asa. Once people heard that Rebbi kept coming back, even after he was alive, he never came back again. Shalol hotilaz al tzadikim rishonim, so that people wouldn't talk badly against the earlier tzaddikim, who we weren't able to come back. Now, we won't be able to fully explain this, but some explain that he came back with some different body. He didn't have his body that he had as alive. I don't know that we have to say that he came back in any body, but there is an idea about the Neshama Yasera. So some say that the Neshama Yasera is that even the people who are in Gehenna getting punished on Shabbos, they get a reprieve, so they come to this world to have Hana. So certainly Rabbi was not Chas v'shalom from that, but because of the special Kedusha of Shabbos, he came back. Maybe, I mean, the fact that he wanted the candle and the shulchan and the bed would indicate that there was some type of goof that he was going to sit, but I find it very difficult that he came to actually to eat. So Mir Tashem will talk a little bit more, and there's a lot more to this to about when Rebbe was dying, and we will, God willing, continue it next week.